Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Foxy and this is Foxy Books and Planning. Before I get into the video, I just wanted to apologize for my absence for the last couple of weeks. I've been working incredibly long hours at work and just haven't had time to sit down and film, let alone edit. And I'm hoping I will get back to my regular recording and editing schedule this week. That being said, I do also apologize. I did not intentionally do Mardi Gras colors, even if this is more of a lime green than a dark green, but I did not intentionally do Mardi Gras colors, because Mardi Gras was last Tuesday. But with that, let's get into it. The video that I wanted to do is one that I hope I will turn into a series of videos on my channel, and that is 4 genre reviews in one. And the general idea is that every couple of weeks, every couple of months, once I've finished a good chunk of books, to sit down, pick out 4 books that I've read that are from completely different genres, and review them for you as kind of mini reviews, and give you my thoughts on them. And with that, I want to get started with our first book, which is Magpie Murders by Anthony Horowitz. This is a murder mystery. I would put it firmly in mystery. It does have some thrillery elements, but it is based on a traditional whodunit cop procedural, so mystery. I read this book as an audiobook that I borrowed from the library. This book was originally published in 2016, and the general premise is that publisher Susan Ryland has received the final manuscript for the final book in a detective book series for a detective named Atticus Punt. And so the first part of the book is her reading the manuscript, and so you're reading the manuscript along with her. And then the second part of the book is she's finished the manuscript, and it has just been announced on the news that the author, who is one of her authors at her publishing company, has committed suicide. And she finds that fairly suspicious. And so the second half of the book is her investigating the author's murder, because not only is she trying to investigate his murder and figure out what actually happened to him, he delivered the manuscript missing a couple of chapters. And so it's the chapters that reveal who the killer is. And so she's trying to find those chapters so that she can salvage this last book and actually publish it. I really enjoyed the plot, especially the story within a story. To me, it was very reminiscent of The Silkworm by J.K. Rowling, writing as Robert Galbraith, where we have an author who's been murdered, and the murder plot has similarities with the book that they have written before they died. I also really liked the whole idea of it being a whodunit within a whodunit, because some of my favorite books of all time are like Hercule Poirot and Nero Wolfe novels. Nero Wolfe novels. So detective novels that are kind of in that mid-20th century whodunit structure. And I really enjoyed how Horowitz carried over that same idea into the modern era. This was actually not the first book I had read by Anthony Horowitz. I've read several of his other young adult books. I also was chuffed to find out that he actually wrote several of the Midsummer Murders TV show plots. For those of you who don't know what Midsummer Murders is, it was kind of like Law and Order meets Sherlock Holmes, where you're following a detective as he investigates murders in Midsummer in England, and each episode is a movie-length episode. But Anthony Horowitz actually wrote some of the screenplays for those, and that's where he kind of got the idea for this book. That being said, Susan Ryland as a character is someone I really enjoy. She's multifaceted. She's not just a career woman focused on getting this book published above all else. She actually does care about the human aspects, and she does have a separate romance going on that's completely unrelated to the murder mystery that I really enjoy. And I especially like the fact that even though people have told her that she doesn't know what she's doing and life isn't like a murder mystery, she's basically said, I'm going to figure out what happened come hell or high water. And that is that. Overall, I gave this book 5 stars. I really, really enjoyed it. I didn't see the end coming. With murder mysteries, I always rate the book by whether or not I figured out who did it and when I figured out who did it. And with this one, I was guessing. I had inklings, but I didn't really get the ending, especially the reasons why the killer gives themselves away. So that being said, Magpie Murders, if you like mysteries, I highly suggest you check it out. And that is my first of 4 books for this review. Is Black Klansman by Ron Stallworth. This is a nonfiction memoir about Ron Stallworth during his time in the investigative service for the Colorado Springs Police Department, infiltrating the Ku Klux Klan. I read this as an audiobook that I borrowed from the library, and the book was released in 2018. There is also a movie that was released in late 2018 by Spike Lee that is based on this book, and won Spike Lee a Best Adapted Screenplay. In terms of the book, I would say the audiobook is probably the wrong route to go. Nothing against Mr. Stallworth, but he reads the audiobook, and it's very dry. And for something that should be really interesting and really compelling, the audio just lets it down, because it really sounds like Mr. Stallworth is sitting there reading you his case files. And it gets really, really slow. Overall, for the plot, the actual story is amazing, because basically what happened was, it was the late 70s, I want to say. I'll throw up the actual date, dates as a correction for myself if I'm wrong. And Mr. Stallworth was part of the investigations branch, and his job was to review the classifieds in the newspaper for any suspicious activity. And he saw an ad that was basically like, would you like to apply for the Klan? Write to this post box. And he wrote to the post box thinking it was a joke and he would never hear anything again. And the following week, this guy calls him up and says, hey, you want to be a Klan member? Well, why do you want to be a Klan member? And it goes from there, and he recruits another man in the department, in the investigations group, to go undercover for him, since he can't go to Klan meetings as an African American. And it becomes a tale of 2 Stallworths. So you have the Ron Stallworth, who's a Klan member, who's going to these meetings and talking about these things. And then you have Ron Stallworth, the black cop, who's the essentially puppet master for this whole thing. And it comes to a head with David Duke's visit to Colorado Springs. And it was a really, really interesting story. It was really, the story itself is like, I couldn't believe what I was reading, and I know it's a true story, but the story itself, the impact of it, was let down by the narration. Overall, I gave it 3 stars. It's definitely a compelling read, especially in today's political climate. But definitely pick it up as a paperback. I would skip the audiobook altogether. Alright, book number 3 is a book called Secondhand Curses by Drew Hayes. This is an Audible original audiobook. So it's primarily an audiobook. It is also available as an ebook, but it's intended to be an audiobook. This book was published in 2017 by Audible. So the general plot of this is you're following a group of renegades, rogues, called the Bastard Champions, who are led by Jack, and then there is Frank and Marie. And essentially what they do is they live in a fairy tale world that is controlled by the narrative, and the narrative and the things that happen are in opposition to what one would consider a fairy tale. So like the opening scene is them coming to help Cinderella because she's made a deal with a fairy who is not the fairy godmother. and has actually signed her life away to servitude to said fairy once the prince falls in love with her. And so she's hired the bastard champions to handle the fairy problem so that she can marry the prince and have her happy ending. And like most teams, each member of the team has their own strength. So, and they all play to each other's strengths as they go through the story. And as the story evolves, it goes from being just, here's a fairy tale, here's how we solve it and make money, to a, we're tracking the blue fairy and we're trying to find her because she has cursed us and we would like to reverse those curses. And that plot is really entertaining, especially the ending to this book. I won't spoil it because I much prefer y'all to experience it for yourself, but it was one where I was kind of chuffed at the end of the, oh, okay, that's fun. And it's one of those books that I really hope Drew writes a sequel or sells the TV rights or something like that, because while it is a lot like Once Upon a Time, it's one that I could really see, it's a book that I could really appreciate a television adaptation for like a limited series for. In terms of characters, we have our three main characters. So we have Jack, who's a mercenary, Frank, who's kind of the scientific brain, and then Marie, who's kind of their cultural attaché / trump card. And so they all hail from recognizable literature, so I won't spoil that. It's a lot of fun to figure out who each of the characters are as you go through the book, because that's half of the puzzle, is to figure out who these people are and why they're hunting the blue fairy. But Jack, they're all fairly well developed. They are slightly one-dimensional in that they have their key characteristic and they don't really grow outside of that characteristic as we get further along in the story. That Marie definitely grows, but Frank and Jack are fairly minimally growth oriented throughout the stories. I really appreciated the teamwork play because there is a little bit of odd couple going on, and there is a lot of in-jokes for fairy tales and whatnot. I also appreciated that we did have a female character in Marie who is not a helpless damsel in distress. She's actually out trying to fix her own problems and save her own kingdom. And so overall, I gave this book a 5 out of 5. Like I said, I'm really hoping there's a sequel or a limited series or something so I can enjoy this in a different way or continue my enjoyment of it. And I highly recommend it. I know I forgot to mention at the beginning, but this is my fantasy pick for my genre. Alright, so the last book I'm going to do today is a book that I actually read the physical copy of. So this is Out of the Silent Planet by C.S. Lewis. I know I showed this one in my new to booktube tag as something that was on my current reading list. So this is the first book in the Cosmic Trilogy, which is C.S. Lewis's science fiction trilogy that was published in 1938. So fairly early on, and I believe I'll go back and check the dates, and if I'm wrong, I'll throw a correction up. But I think this book actually predates the Chronicles of Narnia, because I think Narnia comes out after World War II. But the general plot is that we're following a main character called Dr. Ransom, who is wandering around, and I'll throw corrections up again if I'm wrong. He's wandering around other, like, the Scottish Highlands or the English moors, and he runs across, it must be the moors, but he stumbles upon two of his colleagues kind of out in the middle of nowhere building a spaceship, and he's just kind of like, oh, what's going on? Why are y'all building a spaceship? And they're like, we're gonna fly to Mars. He's like, okay, bye, and then they knock him out and throw him on the ship and take him to Mars. The majority of the book is Dr. Ransom actually integrating into Martian society and kind of describing Martian society. This is a very typical early 20th century science fiction book where it's a lot of discussion of culture and race, and there's not as much focus on the actual science. It's more social science than hard science. And by hard science, I mean chemistry, biology, physics. It's much more sociology and anthropology. And over the course of the book, Dr. Ransom actually becomes fairly friendly with the Martians, and they explain to him that he is from the Silent Planet that they used to communicate with thousands of years ago, but the planet fell silent, and they haven't heard anything since. So this is the first contact this particular planet has had. And so you have the plot of him integrating into Martian society, but and then there's the plot where he's trying to get home. Because while he does appreciate Martians, he's always trying to get back to Earth. In terms of characters, Dr. Ransom's great. He's multidimensional. He's really, really interesting in the way he describes Martian culture, Martian language, and how he works to integrate himself. Even though he finds himself on a spaceship hurtling towards Mars, he's never really terrified. But you can tell in the way that he describes things that he's definitely a little freaked out by what's happening. Overall, I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it, but it's I'm trying to figure out words. Essentially, my big problem with this, which is why it's not a 4 or 5 star book, is that as much as I love C.S. Lewis, this is not the writing style I like from him. I much prefer his post-World War II writing style. This is very dense and very dry, and it was difficult to get through. And I mean, the book's only 224 pages, and it took me like 6 months to get through. And when I was into it, I was reading it, I was going, it was interesting, it was great, and then there would just be sections where there would be like a 3-page description of the foliage, and I'm just like, as much as I like this, I can't deal with 3-page descriptions of foliage. Especially in a book that's that short. And that's one of my biggest complaints about reading classic literature, is that I love classics, but I understand that they got paid by the word, but god dang, I cannot stand the drawn out descriptions. I mean, one of the books I read in college, Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, it's an interesting book. It's really interesting discussion of Russian society. I didn't need the 10-page description of the serfs cutting the wheat in the fields, but I got it. And that's the kind of thing that I dread reading classics, are the long, drawn-out descriptions of books. But with those are my 4 books. This is science fiction, by the way, if you didn't guess. So my 4 books, to give you all a wrap-up, and I'll figure out how to do a sidebar decal-y thing to kind of do a summary. So I read Magpie Murders by Anthony Horowitz, which was a mystery that I gave 5 out of 5 stars to. I read Black Klansman, which is a memoir by Ron Stallworth, which was 3 out of 5 stars. I read Secondhand Curses by Drew Hayes, which was fantasy, which got 5 out of 5 stars. And our final book was Out of the Silent Planet by C.S. Lewis, which was science fiction, which got 3 out of 5 stars. If you agree or disagree with any of my reviews, please shoot me a comment down below. I'd love to discuss what y'all did or didn't like about any of these books. If y'all had a different opinion, I'd love to hear it. Or if you have any extra thoughts about, yeah, I kind of saw that too and I understand. Shoot me a comment. Please like and subscribe, and I'll talk at you in the next video. Bye.